Okay, so how do our authorities pass this GM food? We've got Food Standards Australia and New Zealand are our food regulators. They don't do any tests. They rely on the tests done by the companies that are sent into them. They'll look at the published studies, but because it's controlled by patent, very few exist. They've passed every application they receive. They also don't commission any independent testing either. So basically they just accept the application, have a look, and to date they've passed every single one they've received. MAJ got the raw data from their approval of the GM canola because Australia grows GM cotton and GM canola is grown in New South Wales, Victoria and just recently WA. So we got the raw data and Madeline Love, who's our super MAJ, sat and read through the entire thing. And there's a report on our site, so the canola animal studies for Tony Burke under our key documents. I think, you know, if you have an interest in this area, read that report because it is just shocking what's been done. I won't go into it all, but I will say that there were 4 types of animals that were tested with GM. And in the lamb test, they talked about how the lovely colour of the lamb chop. Now, this is not a study done to show that it's safe for you and your children to eat forever. This is an animal production study to say to the farmer, you can feed your lamb GM feed and he'll turn out a lovely lamb chop at the end of it. I mean, to me, this is just farcical. And it's not just MAJ who's got to be in the bottom. The Auditor General recently reported on Fazants. They weren't looking at the science, they just looked at the process, and basically they said either the information was not provided by the applicants or Fazants had not documented whether the requirements were met. So, or a GM company could provide supporting documentation or scientific studies that could be incorrect or incomplete, and there was no way to assess this. So it assessed this. So it's basically saying any old rubbish could get through this. The really worrying concern as well is that it seems that not every, what I would consider a GM crop is going to be assessed. There's this crop called Smartstax GM corn, and what it does is it has 6 insecticidal genes, so 6 of those BT genes that ended up in the blood, and 2 herbicide-resistant genes, which means it can be sprayed with 2 different herbicides. So Madeline, the Wonder MAJ, again suddenly realised, oh, they're growing this crop, Smartstax, in the States. I haven't seen that it's going to be approved. You know, normally Fazants will put out a statement so you can read through and you can comment. And so she contacted them, and we had this farcical thing where they decided it didn't need to be assessed because although there were 4 GM parent plants, they were naturally crossbred, so that wasn't seen to be as GM, so it didn't need to go through the approval process. And you just think, well, surely it should be even more assessed because it's got 8 of these genes all interacting with one another in who knows what way. Anyway, we did actually manage to get the story up on the 7:30 report, but it was in the same thing as Qantas had a problem with its engine. So it kind of, like, that was what, you know, grabbed everyone's attention. But anyway, we tried. And the most recent thing is we've sort of given up reading all these Fazants things, but a mother contacted us. She got 2 very young children. She said, have you seen the GM crops that are going to be sprayed with 2,4-D? And we said, no. And she said, and have you seen what happened to the mice? So we went, no. So we went and read up. And, okay, what's happening is the wonderful idea about you plant the GM crop and you spray it with the herbicide and the weedicides is not working anymore because weeds are not stupid. They've worked out their way around this. So what you're finding is they're developing super weeds. So you spray the crop and the weeds don't die. So Roundup's not really working anymore. So why don't we use 2,4-D? 2,4-D, it's highly toxic, it's linked to birth defects and was one of the ingredients in Agent Orange. I really do not want it in my food. However, Dow AgroSciences has developed a GM soy and a GM corn that can be sprayed with this stuff. And, you know, following this mother's advice, we read what they'd done. They did no long-term feeding studies, but they did do an acute toxicity trial. So what that meant was they took 10 mice, 5 female, 5 male, and they fed them 2 doses of this stuff, 1 hour apart. They watched them for 2 weeks and they killed them to see what happened. With the GM corn, one of them had a sign of a stomach ulcer, another one a dark patch on the brain. With the GM soy, one had a cyst on the kidney. But this, our fearless regulators decided, was no problem. They didn't say, could you do it on 20 mice or even 100 mice? They just said, okay. And that, you know, that is the level of regulation that we have. Okay, so is this stuff labelled? Well, you know, Australia's very lucky in that we do have labelling laws, but there's so many loopholes that nothing really ends up being labelled. So a lot of the crops are refined into oils, sugars and starches, and the claim is, well, they don't need to be labelled because the GM DNA and protein is removed. Food additives, flavours, etc., and unintentional present doesn't have to be labelled as well. And there's been a labelling review, and there's a bill before Parliament as well at the moment. Anyway, the Australian Food and Grocery Council in the labelling review submission said basically that if all GM-derived ingredients had to be labelled, practically everything on our shelves would need a label. And I just want you to think, have you ever seen a GM label? I think not, probably. So what happened was we were really outraged. Greenpeace paid for some testing because it's very expensive to get this testing done, and they found traces of GM soy in Wyeth's S26 soy infant formula. And we thought this was outrageous because this is babies' first food. That's the whole thing that they eat, you know, and babies are vulnerable, they're growing, the quality of their food is going to affect them for the rest of their lives, and I think their parents have a right to know what they are feeding them. So when we found out that there were trace elements of GM soy, we went into, well, Madge went in Melbourne, and well, we went in with a few Greenpeace mums as well, and there were Greenpeace mums in Sydney as well. And we were really lucky. It got on commercial TV, and I think that it has been one of the things to really raise the issue as well. But with everything, you know, you get a burst and then it fades off, but we're still very concerned about this.